Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hi there, Herman and Corn. So I'd like to ask you guys another question, pragmatic one about living in Israel, and where does the things that we need to live, where do they come from? So Israel is, not a very big country, but it does have a relatively high population density. A lot of the things that you see for sale in terms of electrical appliances, I'm thinking things like, for example, refrigerator or washing machine, have, especially at the kind of cheaper end of the market, they have these weird names that you don't see anywhere else in the world. Just like, I'm not going to name some of them because it's probably, given the rather unfavorable defamation law here, which we'll talk about in another episode, it's probably not even prudent for me to allege that a local manufacturer is just white labeling stuff. So, but anyone who lives in Israel is probably familiar with the type of brands I'm referring to. And you kind of look at them, you look for, if you're looking for looking for a user manual, usually you start with a product number frequently, or that's my pro tip anyway. Whether it's an SKU or a PN, if you're dealing with a reputable company, that often will very quickly get you exactly the product you're looking for. It's more specific than a marketing description. And frequently, even that will fail. So you're like, what actually is this product? Often what I've found is that the breadcrumbs lead back to white labeling. ChatGPT has been immense in this respect. It's like a little forensic investigator. It can take data from a barcode or from written at the firmware level and say, oh, this is a white labeled Midea appliance, this air conditioner. That's all it is. And 99% of the time, it's spot on. It is indeed a white labeled air conditioner from this company based in the US. So I guess my question is, how does this even work? If you're talking about, a company selling air conditioners into the Israeli market, we're talking about potentially 10 million people, a large chunk of whom probably have air conditioning in multiple units. This is millions of units of a product that's being maybe changed a little bit to conform to Israeli safety standards, a sticker, the name changes, but under the hood, it's a non-Israeli product but that supply chain is really hidden from customers. So it's intriguing to me, this world of white labeling and what we call in tech non-OEM goods, OEM, the original equipment manufacturer. How big is this industry, Herman and Corn? And how does this even work? How does an air conditioner that's being manufactured in the US manage to make its way to Israel under a totally different name and without really any clues that consumers can access without at least kind of getting to the level of technical forensics to figure out what it is that they actually own in their living room? Herman and Corn, OEMs and white labeling, over to you.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I am Corn, and I am sitting here in our living room in Jerusalem with my brother.
Herman Poppleberry present and accounted for. And Corn, I have to say, the energy in the house today is a bit investigative. I walked into the kitchen this morning and found our housemate Daniel practically inside the refrigerator with a flashlight.
It really is. Daniel sent over this prompt that basically turned our kitchen into a corporate crime scene. He was looking at the back of the fridge, then the washing machine, then the air conditioner, and he realized that half the brands we have here in Israel do not seem to exist anywhere else in the world. He was asking about the whole world of white labeling and non-original equipment manufacturer goods.
It is a great question. Basically, how is it that these massive international companies are making products that end up in a small market like Israel under completely different, often very local-sounding brand names with almost zero transparency for the average person buying them? Why is my air conditioner called a Tornado when it looks exactly like a unit I saw in a hotel in Greece called a Toyotomi?
It is a fascinating rabbit hole, and honestly, it is one of those things where once you see it, You cannot unsee it. You start noticing that the remote control for your air conditioner looks exactly like the one for a brand in Italy or a generic unit in the United States. Today is January 25th, 2026, and the scale of this industry is just mind-boggling. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars.
Exactly. So today we are going to do a bit of corporate forensics. We are going to look at the big players like Midea and Haier, talk about the difference between original equipment manufacturers and original design manufacturers, and figure out why Israel is such a peculiar hotspot for this kind of rebranding.
I love a good mystery. And as we discussed back in episode 190, the world of white labeling goes way deeper than just putting a sticker on a box. It is about global supply chains, regulatory loopholes, and the massive power of local distribution. So, Herman, where do we even start with the scale of this thing?
Well, to understand the scale, you have to look at what I call the big four of global manufacturing. If you have an appliance in your house that isn't a high-end Bosch or a Samsung, there is a very high probability it was made by one of four companies: Midea, Haier, Arçelik, or Vestel.
I recognize those names, but I think most people wouldn't. Midea, for example, I see their own brand appearing more often now in 2026, but for years they were just the ghost in the machine for everyone else, right?
Exactly. Midea is a monster. They are based in China, and they are arguably the largest producer of major appliances in the world. As of this year, the global white goods market, which is just the industry term for large appliances like fridges and washers, is sitting at over $800 billion. Some estimates even push it toward $900 billion, and Midea is a huge chunk of that. They don't just make their own stuff, they bought Toshiba's home appliance business, and they manufacture for dozens of other brands.
And then there is Haier. They are the ones who bought General Electric's appliance division, right?
Yes, back in 2016, which was a massive turning point. Haier has been the world's #1 major appliance brand for about 15 years running now. In 2025, their global revenue hit nearly $56 billion. They own GE Appliances in the United States, Candy in Italy, and Fisher & Paykel in New Zealand. They are everywhere. So when Daniel sees a brand like Family Line or Crystal here in Israel, he is often looking at a Haier or a Midea unit under a different name.
So let's break down the terminology, because this is where people get confused. Most people know the term original equipment manufacturer, or OEM. That is when a brand like Apple designs a phone and pays a factory like Foxconn to build it to their exact specs. The brand owns the design, the intellectual property, everything.
Right, but the appliance world often uses the ODM model, the original design manufacturer. In the ODM world, the manufacturers say, Midea designs the refrigerator. They do the research and development, they build the cooling system, they design the chassis. Then they go to a company in Israel and say, hey, do you want to sell this? We can put your logo on the front, change the plastic trim to a different color, and maybe tweak the software interface to be in Hebrew.
And that is why the transparency is so low. Because the brand we buy from isn't really a manufacturer at all. They are more like a marketing and service company that happens to have a license to a specific factory design. It is a brand as a service model.
Precisely. And for a small market like Israel, it makes total sense. If you are an Israeli entrepreneur, you cannot afford to build a factory to manufacture washing machines for a population of 10 million people. The economics of scale just aren't there. But you can go to China or Turkey, pick a model out of a catalog, and order 10,000 units with the name Crystal or Tornado on them.
That is actually one of the examples Daniel mentioned. Crystal is a huge name here for washing machines, but if you look at the recent data, Haier actually has a series of washing machines called the Crystal line. It is almost like they aren't even trying to hide the connection sometimes, or the local brand just leaned into the factory's name to sound more international.
It is a bit of both. But we also have to talk about the Turkish players, because they are arguably more important for the Israeli market than the Chinese ones due to geography. Arçelik and Vestel are the titans there. Arçelik is the company behind Beko and Grundig, and they recently finished a massive acquisition of Whirlpool's European operations. They are now the largest white goods player in Europe.
And Vestel? I remember you saying they have an entire city dedicated to manufacturing.
They do. It is called Vestel City in Manisa, Turkey. It is one of the largest industrial complexes in the world. If you buy a budget television in Europe or the Middle East, there is a massive chance it was born there. Vestel makes products for over 100 different brands, including Sharp and Toshiba for the European market. For Israel, Turkey is the perfect partner because shipping a container of fridges from Turkey to Haifa is much cheaper and faster than shipping from Shanghai.
Okay, but let's talk about the breadcrumbs Daniel mentioned. He said he uses things like SKU numbers or firmware versions to track these things down. How does that work? If I am a consumer and I want to know who actually made my dishwasher, where do I look?
This is where it gets fun. The first place I always look is the regulatory sticker. In Israel, the law actually requires the name of the producer and the importer to be listed in Hebrew. But often, the producer listed is a subsidiary or a holding company, so you have to go deeper.
Like looking for the FCC ID if it has a wireless chip.
Exactly. Anything with Wi-Fi or Bluetooth has to be registered. If you find the FCC ID, it will lead you directly to the actual manufacturer's filing. But even for dumb appliances, you can look at the physical design. There is a thing I call the remote control test. If you go into a store and look at the remote controls for 5 different local brands of air conditioners, you will notice that the button layout and the LCD screen are identical. That is because the ODM provides a standard remote package.
That is so true. I was at a friend's house the other day, and they had a brand I'd never heard of, but the remote was identical to our old Midea unit. It even had the same follow me function button in the exact same spot.
Right. And the firmware is the ultimate smoking gun. If you have a smart appliance that connects to an app, look at the app's developer or the privacy policy. Half the time, the app is just a reskinned version of the Midea Smart Home app or the higher U+ platform. In fact, just last year in 2025, a group of tech enthusiasts found that you could actually control several different Israeli-branded air conditioners using a generic Midea Wi-Fi dongle because the internal headers were identical.
So why the lack of transparency? Is it just about making us feel like we are buying something local or premium?
It is partly about brand equity. If a company in Israel spent 30 years building a reputation for great service under the name Tornado, they want you to buy a Tornado air conditioner. They don't want you to realize it is the same base model as a cheaper brand down the street. But wait, are they actually the same? This is the question everyone asks. Is a white-labeled Midea the same as a pure Midea or a premium brand that uses the same factory?
That is the million-dollar question. Is the quality identical?
The answer is not necessarily. This is where the ODM model gets nuanced. When a brand orders a product from a factory like Vestel or Gree, which, by the way, is the other massive Chinese player that makes most of Electra's units, they can choose the grade of components. It is like a menu. I want the Midea chassis, but give me the cheaper compressor and the basic insulation to keep the price down. Or, I want the premium inverter motor and the extra quiet fan blades because I am positioning this as a high-end unit.
So, 2 appliances can look identical on the outside, but have very different lifespans on the inside. This is why technicians in Israel rank brands so differently. Tadaran, for example, consistently gets high marks for reliability, something like 72% in recent surveys, while other brands that might use similar factories rank much lower.
Exactly. Tadiran and Electra are the old guard here. Tadiran was actually bought by Carrier years ago, but they kept the name because it has so much local trust. It is a classic example of what we talked about in episode 163 regarding big iron and infrastructure. The brand is the interface between the consumer and the massive, faceless global manufacturing engine.
It is interesting you mention the after-sales service. In a small market like Israel, the brand you are buying is often just a promise of service. You are not buying a manufacturer. You are buying a warranty and a network of technicians who have spare parts. That is actually why these local brands survive. A giant like Midea might not want to set up a massive repair network in every city in Israel, but a local partner like Electra or Tadiran already has that infrastructure.
And don't forget the supermarket. Daniel mentioned this too, how generic products end up under different names. It is the same thing. Kirkland's signature at Costco is the gold standard for this. Their batteries are often made by Duracell, and their tuna is Bumblebee. They aren't hiding it because they built the Kirkland name into a mark of quality. But in the appliance world, there is still this weird desire to pretend the company is making the product in a workshop somewhere.
I think it is because appliances are such a high-stakes purchase. If your tuna is bad, you are out 5 shekels. If your refrigerator dies, you are out 5,000 shekels and a week's worth of groceries. People want to believe there is a factory somewhere with the brand's name on the front door.
Right, but the reality is that the factory probably has 50 different brand names on the front door, and this brings us to a really important point about the future. We are in early 26 now. Is this trend accelerating? Or are we going to see more direct-to-consumer from the big manufacturers?
I have noticed Midea and Haier are putting their own names on more premium stuff lately. Midea just launched a huge campaign called Midea Makes the Wow to build their own brand identity in the West.
It is definitely shifting. The ghost manufacturers are tired of being ghosts. They want the higher margins that come with brand recognition. Haier is the leader here. They bought their way into being a premium brand by acquiring GE and others. I think in the next 5 years, we will see the middleman brands in places like Israel start to struggle unless they can prove they add real value through service or specialized features.
Or unless the regulations change. If Israel or the European Union started requiring a true manufacturer disclosure on the front of the box, that would change the game overnight. Imagine a sticker that says, Tornado, manufactured by Midea, grade B components. That would be a transparency revolution.
It would, but the retailers and the local brands would fight that tooth and nail because it destroys the marketing magic. It is like finding out the wizard is just a guy behind a curtain. But for someone like Daniel, who loves to dig into the details, that guy behind the curtain is the most interesting part.
It really is. And honestly, it makes you appreciate the engineering more. When you realize a company like Midea can produce a unit that works in the humid heat of Tel Aviv, the dry heat of Arizona, and the freezing winters of Northern Europe just by tweaking a few lines of code and a compressor valve, that is actually incredible. The non-OEM industry is a marvel of efficiency, even if it is a nightmare for transparency.
It is the invisible infrastructure of our daily lives. As we talked about in the mainframes episode, number 163, we tend to ignore the massive systems that actually run the world because they aren't sexy or branded in a way we recognize. But the ODM world is the mainframes of the kitchen. It is the big iron of the laundry room.
I love that analogy. And hey, if you are listening to this and you've ever managed to track down the true parent of one of your appliances using a weird SKU or a firmware hack, we want to hear about it. Go to myweirdprobs.com and use the contact form. We love these kinds of technical deep dives.
We really do. And while you're at it, if you've been enjoying these deep dives into the weird corners of our world, do us a huge favor and leave a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other curious people find the show, and we love reading your feedback.
It makes a massive difference for a show like ours. So, Daniel, I hope that sheds some light on the weird names on the back of our appliances. The breadcrumbs are there, you just have to know which language they are written in.
Usually C++ or Mandarin, apparently.
Exactly. Alright, I think that is a wrap for today.
Thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. You can find all our past episodes and more information at myweirdprompts.com.
Until next time, keep asking the weird questions.
We will be here to help you find the answers. See ya.
Bye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox Turbo.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.